How in the world did you get into Bigfoot?
Well, the shortest version of that story is I had always kind of known about these things. My uncle told me a story when I was probably 7 or 8 about finding large footprints in fresh snow when he was going to a cabin of his or a cabin of his friends in Northern California in the 70s. And I thought that was a great story. And so that sort of has always been in my mind. I've always been kind of aware of these things as a cultural phenomenon, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it was only in the last 10 years or so that I started really looking into these things as being a real possibility and an actual species of animal.
Mm-hmm.
And so ever since then, I've been spending pretty much all of my free time and now also all of my working life looking into reports, doing field work, trying to figure out where these things are most of the time. I'm tired of the "are they real" question, and I want to know how they're existing and how they're doing this so well.
Mm-hmm. Because I like what you say about sort of like the storytelling thing. It's like you give the information, you kind of like let it travel through generation to generation.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say, like for me personally, in the Black community, I only know one person, and that is my aunt who
Yeah.
is in Bigfoot. We do not believe in, what do you call them, like cryptic?
Yeah, cryptids is kind of the general term for
Yeah,
monsters.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like in my culture, if someone says something about Bigfoot, it's like, girl, shut up. Because it's like we don't. And
Sure.
so what's interesting, let me go back a little bit about
Mm-hmm.
me. So I'm a skeptic. I will go ahead and say that.
As you should be.
And I'm a native Oregonian, and my aunt, she actually had me come with her to like a Bigfoot festival. And I can't remember what part of Oregon it was, but we drove down there and we're like the only two Black people there. And it kind of like inspired my horror story. I wrote a screenplay.
Oh, cool.
And it's just like, yeah, it's just not in our world. So it's just
Mm-hmm.
like to hear that this is something that you pass through generations. Is just like, we don't really have those stories to tell.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. It's I mean, even most of the stories that I have heard kind of go back to the Native American legends. These animals, the Bigfoot, Sasquatch, they've been on the continent for as long as human beings have. And so you do get a lot of stories, in Native American culture that have been here for, like, the stories have existed for a few thousand years. And so there really is kind of this element of passing the stories down.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, a lot of people look at these animals as just folklore and myth, which is totally acceptable.
Okay.
There are a lot of stories about dragons that are passed down from generation to generation. I don't think dragons are real,
Mm-hmm.
but I've also never seen a plaster cast of a dragon footprint. So there's no real physical evidence that can support dragon stories, as cool as that would be.
Mm-hmm. Now you said you just got into this kind of like 10, did you say 10 years ago? Or just
10 years ago, I really started taking it seriously, but I've been interested most of my entire life.
So what made you want to be serious about it? Like, what did you see? What did you experience to make you like, want to be intrigued? I mean,
Well, there wasn't like, I didn't walk out of my house one day and there was a Sasquatch there. And it's not as exciting about that. I started, I just, for some reason, I'm not entirely sure why, I realized, oh yeah, I was into Bigfoot when I was younger. I wonder why. I should look into that. Like, I should read that book again. I should kind of look into this. And then as, an older person at that point, I saw a lot more compelling evidence than I did when I was an 8-year-old who was thinking, oh, sweet, monsters are real. This is great, And about that same time, I heard, I was living in Colorado at this point, and I heard that somebody had found tracks, fresh Bigfoot tracks in the snow, only an hour or two from my house. And I thought, well, that's really weird. I thought these things were like a Pacific Northwest thing.
Yeah.
And so I thought I should just go look. If supposedly one's up there in this area right now, like, it's not going to hurt if I just go for a hike You know, it was February, I think. So it was cold.
You weren't
Yeah.
scared to do that. Did you do it by yourself?
I went with my sister and one of my best friends at that point.
What in the hell would make you want to go find the Bigfoot?
I'm curious. I like mysteries, and I like figuring out whatever the truth is to the mystery. Like if it turns out in 10 years I'm wrong and these things aren't real, I will accept that. I want to know what's going on.
Mhm.
So we went out and we looked around, didn't see anything. We heard a weird noise that I can't quite identify, some sort of long howling call. Don't know what it was. Don't know what it could have been. I have heard recordings of reported Sasquatch vocalizations that sound similar, but the trouble with audio is you don't see what's making it, so you can never be sure what's making it. Could have been anything. But from there, it kind of, I don't want to say spiraled out of control because that sounds bad, but I just started spending more time looking into these things until it just kind of became my life. You know, you don't pick your parents and you don't pick your passions. And here I am, you know?
Yeah, that's like me with horror. Like it
Yeah.
found me almost.
Right.
You get it? Like, yeah, I didn't say, oh, I literally had an epiphany one day and I'm like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. Got it. It made sense.
Yeah.
So, okay, so you heard the call, you saw tracks, you did more research.
I didn't see the tracks personally. I should clarify. Yeah. I heard that somebody had found tracks and I was like, oh, I'll go look. Yeah. I'm kind of a stickler for details, which I'm sorry, but yeah.
So like, what would you say to someone like me who is a skeptic?
Well, when a lot of people ask me questions like that, they're usually surprised to find out that I'm one of the most skeptical people about the subject that I know, because, you know, there are real animals out there that fit these descriptions, but there are also a lot of people who are either incorrect with what they're seeing, like they see a bear, or they're in a car, they see a big tree stump and they think, oh, it's a Bigfoot, because they're thinking of a Bigfoot. Or there are people who are actively lying about these things or hoaxing these things. Like it's this really weird thing where if I was studying gorillas, I wouldn't have people hoaxing gorilla sightings, you know, or some other rare animal.
Mm-hmm.
But in this particular topic, because these are supposed to not exist, you get people who are faking sightings and filming fake video. So most of the video you find on the internet is fake. But I encourage people to be skeptical about this because there is a lot of garbage about the subject out there.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes down to it, it's just really boring wildlife biology. You know, it's not monster hunting in the dark. It's not, it's not monster hunting. You go in the dark a lot, but it's not, it's just, you go out and see what happens.
We'll make sure not to tag the Travel Channel on this.
You can if you would. You can if you like.
They're
TV is acceptable. Yeah.
Allegedly. So I've heard many different types of Bigfoot. I don't know if you put an S on it, Bigfoots or Bigfoot, Big feet. I don't know.
That is a huge debate. What is the plural of Bigfoot? I've heard big feets. I've heard Bigfoots. I've heard Bigfoot, like moose, moose or moose. I don't know.
The creatures.
Yeah.
Those.
These things.
But I've heard different names for them. And I'm like, okay, does that mean the way that what you call them will let you know what part of the country that you're in? Because I know up here we call them like Bigfoot or maybe like Sasquatch. But I also heard, what was it called? A skunk ape?
Skunk ape, yes.
I'm like, where do they look like in the country? Like, is that a southern thing? Is that like tell me more.
Yeah, so the part of the reason that I believe these things are real is because they've been sighted across the entire continent. And even, Canada and other countries have animals like this too. But they all have different names. So like you were just mentioning, the skunk ape is predominantly in the South. Mm-hmm. Because apparently it smells really bad is one of the reasons they got that name. And so there are all these different groups across the continent have different names for these animals because people have been seeing these things as long as people have been here. And, back in 1804, you can't say, oh, I just saw a big hairy ape man thing. I should tweet about this and see what they're calling it, because that's not how the world worked back then. So all these different small communities would come up with their own names for these animals. And that's the same as well in Native American culture. There are different names for these in every group across the continent that live in viable habitat. And so you will see, here's an interesting fun fact. If you go back in the reports, like newspaper published articles back into the late 1700s, these things are often referred to as like wild men or giant hairy men and stuff like that, until about the time that the gorillas are discovered in Africa, and that knowledge trickles to America, and they start calling these things like ape men and large gorillas. And so the fact that people started realizing these things might just be big apes kind of right off the bat is really interesting, as soon as they had a knowledge of apes, which I think is kind of cool.
You know what? I'm so glad you said that. I actually watched something on YouTube because I did a little bit of research to write my story, and it's something about large hairy men that like didn't like evolve or something, that they're like hiding in the woods, and I'm like, that's kind of like a thought.
Yeah.
I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah. I would say, obviously, we're not going to know what these things are until we have a body and we can take it apart and do the genetics on the thing. But for the entirety of human evolution, going back millions and millions of years, there have been, people look at evolution like a straight line, right? It's one thing evolved into the next, which became the next. But only within the last 20 or so years, we've realized that evolution isn't a straight line. It's like this giant branching tree that's intertwining with itself and all sorts of dead ends and crossing over. And so throughout the entire fossil record, there have always been multiple species of hominin, which are basically bipedal human ancestors. There have always been multiple species on the planet at the same time, until right now, where it's just Homo sapiens. So why should we think that because the fossil record is empty right now, the only time period where we can't get fossils from, just because the fossil record ends 800,000 years ago, that's nothing geologically speaking. So the idea of these being just a living, breathing species that maybe branched off 3 or 6 million years ago from the main timeline of human evolution and are just still out there is totally plausible. And there are animals that do fit descriptions of Sasquatch in the fossil record.
So what is the technical, like physical description? Like, how tall are they? Does the hair vary? Is it black? Is it brown? Do they have teeth? Like, what do they look like?
Well, the reports are surprisingly consistent from across the country, the continent, and throughout history, right? So Sasquatch are almost always said to be, the hair color is either like black or brown, or kind of has like orange reddish hints to it. Pretty much anything that you can find in natural human hair, you can see in Sasquatch reports. There have been big gray ones sometimes. So that falls right into the ape category as far as I'm concerned. They are large, on average, maybe 7-8 feet tall. I've heard stories of 9 feet tall. Anything taller than that starts to not make sense logically. So they're normally pretty big. Of course, people see small ones too, because they're not born 8 feet tall. One thing that's interesting is that if you map out Sasquatch sightings based on latitude, latitude's up, right? Yeah. The farther north you get, the bigger the animals are. And that checks out with a thing called Bergman's rule, which is basically, you find this in other species, where the colder of a climate the animal lives in, the larger they have to be to conserve heat and energy, right? Which is why black bears in Alaska are way bigger than black bears in Florida. So you can kind of see that in Sasquatch reports, which again, if people were just making these things up, you wouldn't see a natural curve like that. And with the footprints, I'm kind of answering your question and going on tangent at the same time. I'm sorry.
I like it.
So with the footprints, they are often between 14 to 16 inches long.
Wow.
Right? And again, if you take all the data of footprints, you end up with two bell curves around those two sizes, right? And when you chart whether it's height or size or weight or whatever in a natural population of animals, you will get bell curves. And so the implication of there being two averages for Sasquatch foot size implies that these animals exhibit traits of sexual dimorphism, where the males are larger than the females, which is also common in a lot of other apes. So again, the reports are remarkably consistent across the entire continent. And if people were making the story up, you would get ones that have horns or that are purple. And you don't. You get really rational descriptions of animals doing really odd but consistent behaviors.
And they wouldn't typically be found in a city. Like you would, if anyone were to have a Bigfoot sighting, would you say that they would have to be somewhere in the woods or a mountain?
Generally speaking, yes. You need viable habitat for these animals to exist in. And so you're not going to find one in downtown Manhattan, right? But that being said, every now and then you'll get bears that walk into the town. You'll get, like little small places in the mountains. So they are seen occasionally in cities. We had a road crossing about a little over a month or two ago, like 15 minutes from here, which is only, I should make that in a term that makes sense to people who aren't sitting where I'm sitting. That's probably 45 minutes southeast of downtown Portland.
Oh, wow.
There was a road crossing at 4:30 in the morning on a Thursday.
I can't wait to text my aunt that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We get, so here at the North American Bigfoot Center, we get probably on average 3 to 5 reports a week.
You're kidding me.
Nope. We get 3 to 5 a week, give or take. And they're not always, immediate. Usually it's, oh, I saw one in 97 or I saw one a couple months back. But on average, once a month, we'll get a report within a day or two of it happening. And then Cliff and I will go out to the location as soon as possible. We'll look for prints, we'll look for hair, all that sort of stuff. We actually poured a plaster cast of a footprint in July from a place up near here. And so these things are seen quite frequently.
Wow.
A lot more than you imagine.
Is there like a button or something on your website that people can just like go to like report a Bigfoot?
They can, yeah, we get emails often, just North American Bigfoot Center at gmail.com. So if you've seen one and you're listening or watching this, let us know. But most of those reports are from people who walk into the museum. But people are always welcome to call or email us, whatever they'd like to do, which is great.
So this is part of my skeptic coming out, and I know you've probably heard this question a million times, and you know what I'm about to ask you.
I've got 3 options.
Why has Bigfoot not been caught? Why has it been found? Why can't we find it?
Well, the clever answer would be, well, a lot of people find them all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's no body.
Right.
And the rules of science that were founded, whoever knows how long ago, to play by their rules, we need to have a body that they can take apart and dissect and look at. And we don't, sorry, I just kicked something and made noise. We don't have a body yet.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't say that's not for a lack of trying, because I'm firmly on we shouldn't actively try to kill one of these things to prove they're real.
My next thing, like, come on.
I don't like that. It's like, where's the fun in going to hunt gorillas? That sounds awful. So I'm not pro kill, but I know that it has to happen eventually. And I think it will eventually. One's going to walk out in front of my stud. Let me start over that. It's only a matter of time until one walks out in front of like a semi truck or something, because most hunters in the woods aren't carrying the firepower you would need to drop one of these things, because I have heard legitimate reports of people shooting them before. And I know that's happened. Doesn't happen often, but that does happen. And almost every time, whatever they hit drops for a second and then gets up and lets out some sort of awful scream and just goes running off into the woods.
Huh.
So I think it's going to take luck, whether it's bad or good luck, to bring one of these things in.
So there's like this whole culture of course, Bigfoot or Squatchers, whatever
Mhm.
they're called. How did this whole organization come to? Like, when did it start, and how is it going?
This one specifically, or the culture of Bigfooters in general?
Well, the organization specifically.
Okay. So the North American Bigfoot Center here, we've only been open for about a year and some months or something officially. It started because the owner, Cliff Barrickman, he was on the TV show Finding Bigfoot for 10 years or whatever it was, right?
Hmm.
And he's been doing this for 20 years or something. And so over that time, he's collected a lot of evidence, and a lot of people bring stuff to him because he has this kind of platform of being not only a real Bigfooter, but a TV celebrity. So he's well known in the community.
Mhm.
And as a result, he's gathered tons of stuff. Got a huge collection of casts and videos and footprints, all sorts of evidence, right? And he needed a place to put it all.
Mhm.
And so the museum was that option. He often describes it as a fifth grade science project gone wrong. And that's a perfect way to explain it. We've got a gift shop in the front for just kind of the casual tourists. But the back 2/3 of the building is just massive exhibit halls full of evidence and information on these animals.
So has this stuff been tested?
Yeah, everything that we have in here is legitimate. We don't have any, I mean, we have some hoaxes because we know they're hoaxes, and we're like working on displays of this is why the hoaxed footprints are so obviously fake, stuff like that. So everything we have in the museum is legitimately Sasquatch related.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, tons of footprints. We've got 3 or 4 videos back there, all sorts of good stuff.
Hmm. So how would one start their journey if they wanted to be you said a Bigfooter?
The best advice I could give somebody who wants to get into this is to just start doing it. Get some books. Dr. Jeff Meldrum's book, Sasquatch Legend Meets Science, is a great place to start. It is, as the name explains, a nice meeting of the history and the lore and an actual scientific approach. He's a professor of anthropology at Idaho State University. The guy knows what he's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Get some books, read some stuff, and just go camping. The Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization website, which I think is bfro.net, they've got a good sighting database with maps. Find a spot that looks like it's had reports. If they've been there before, they often go there again. Just go camp. Let's go camp for a couple nights. Camp as much as you can. Get out in the woods, because you're not going to find one at Starbucks.
Or a candy. I don't know.
Well, maybe. I don't know.
So how do we find out more information about your organization? Where can we go?
The best place is our website. I mean, the best place is actually in the museum. If you're in Boring, Oregon, and want to come check us out, come check us out. Otherwise,
is a real place.
It is a real place.
Real place. I know someone from Boring, Oregon.
We are technically an unincorporated Boring, so we're right there. Our website, which is just NorthAmericanBigfootCenter.com, is good, and we've recently launched an online membership through Patreon, so you want to check that out. It's patreon.com/NABC, and for like $6 a month, you get access to all sorts of field investigation videos, write-ups, blog reports, updates in the museum, all sorts of good stuff. So, like that footprint we cast in July, we filmed that entire field investigation. So that's on there. Like, you can see us in the field doing work towards softening the blow of discovery, because it's only a matter of time until everyone knows these things are real.
Ooh, that's tweetable.
I hope it's like 5 years. I hope I'm alive when that happens, but who knows?
Hey, it's 2020. It might happen before the end of the year. You never know.
That'd be a great New Year present, right?
Yeah. Thanks for my aunt. Good grief. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I
of course.
Appreciate it.
Anytime. Always glad to help.